Jeffrey Lundgren walked 17 steps from his cell to the execution chamber. He knew exactly what was waiting. So did the families of the 5 people he murdered in a barn while his followers ate dinner inside the house. October 24th, 2006. Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. 10:17 a.m. A 56-year-old man lies strapped to a gurney, IVs in both arms. In a few minutes, he'll be dead. But before we get to his final words and what he ate for his last meal, you need to understand what he did. Because this wasn't just murder. This was a massacre, and it all started with a dinner invitation. April 17th, 1989, Kirtland, Ohio. A family of 5 walks into a farmhouse for dinner. Dennis Avery, 49, his wife Cheryl, 46, their daughters, Trina, 15, Rebecca, 13, Karen, 7. They sit down to eat with their spiritual leader, Jeffrey Lundgren. They trust him completely. They've given him their life savings. They moved to Ohio to follow him. They believe he speaks directly to God. What they don't know is that Jeffrey has already dug their graves, a pit in the barn, 6 feet by 7 feet, 4 feet deep. After dinner, while other followers clean dishes inside, Jeffrey and 5 men will take that family into the barn, one by one, and execute them. This is the story of how a cult leader convinced 24 people he was a prophet, how he controlled every dollar they earned, how he selected women to become his wives, how he planned to violently seize a historic Mormon temple, and how, when the FBI started investigating, he decided a blood sacrifice would bring about the second coming of Christ.
The Avery family would be that sacrifice. Jeffrey Don Lundgren was born May 3, 1950 in Independence, Missouri. His childhood was brutal. His father beat him regularly. Neighbors witnessed it. His mother never intervened. Jeffrey grew up isolated, few friends, poor social skills. But he excelled at one thing: hunting. He became an expert marksman. Hours with his father, learning rifles, learning precision, learning to kill. In 1970, he met Alice Keeler at a church youth event. Both had been abused as children. Alice got pregnant. They dropped out of college and married that spring. Jeffrey's parents refused to attend the wedding. Jeffrey enlisted in the Navy, served as an electronics technician from 1970 to 1974, got an honorable discharge, settled in San Diego with Alice. They had 4 children, but Jeffrey couldn't hold a job. Money problems forced them back to Missouri. Hospital records show Jeffrey became violent with Alice. She was hospitalized with a ruptured spleen. Doctors suspected he pushed her into a door handle. Jeffrey stole from nearly every employer. He was dishonest, manipulative, obsessed with religion. By 1981, Jeffrey had turned against the RLDS Church, the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It was becoming progressive, ordaining women as ministers. Jeffrey saw this as betrayal, so he started his own group in Missouri, teaching his own version of Scripture. In 1984, Jeffrey claimed God told him to move to Kirtland, Ohio. Kirtland was home to the historic Kirtland Temple, built by Joseph Smith in the 1830s. Jeffrey saw this as divine instruction. He moved his family there, got an unpaid position as senior temple guide, lived in a church home right next to the temple. Jeffrey was charismatic, IQ of 124, knew the Bible inside and out. He taught something called chiastic interpretation, a method of reading Scripture by finding mirror patterns in the text. He claimed he invented it. He hadn't. Chiasmus had been used for centuries. Jeffrey told followers that everything God created was a mirror. Scripture had to be interpreted the same way. He pointed to the word Ohio, same backward and forward, proof of divine design. People were mesmerized. Jeffrey seemed to understand the Bible in ways their ministers couldn't. But he wasn't teaching. He was building control. Jeffrey forbade followers from talking among themselves. He called it murmuring, declared it a sin. He eavesdropped on conversations, made them think he could read minds. He demanded all their money, claimed the group needed it. He selected certain women to become his plural wives, told them it was God's will, made women dance naked in the wilderness to cleanse themselves. He dominated every Bible study, intimidated anyone who questioned him. By 1987, the RLDS Church had enough. Jeffrey was dismissed after officials suspected he stole donations, around $40,000 meant for the temple. The church evicted him and his family. Jeffrey moved to a rented farmhouse on Chardon Road in rural Kirtland. About 20 followers moved with him, turned over their paychecks, dedicated their lives to his teachings. Among those followers was Dennis Avery, 49 years old, devout RLDS member from Independence, Missouri. He heard about Jeffrey's teachings and was captivated, believed Jeffrey was a true prophet.
April 1987. Dennis sold his house in Missouri, moved his entire family to Kirtland, gave Jeffrey the proceeds from the sale, tens of thousands of dollars. Cheryl Avery, 46, devoted mother and wife, loyal to her husband's beliefs. Their 3 daughters came with them, Trina, Rebecca, Karen. The Avery family trusted Jeffrey completely. They had no idea he saw them as expendable. By 1988, Jeffrey's teachings turned violent. He began preaching about the second coming of Christ, claimed it would happen at the Kirtland Temple on May 3rd, his birthday. He told followers they needed to seize the temple by force. They would have to kill anyone who stood in their way. Jeffrey had followers digging tunnels, stockpiling weapons, preparing for armed takeover. Then an informant tipped off the Kirtland police. May 1988, Police Chief Dennis Yarborough confronted Jeffrey at the station, warned him about complaints of gunfire on his property. Jeffrey called off the temple takeover, told his followers he'd spoken to a higher power. But the police kept watching. September 1988, a second informant came forward. Officer Ron Andelsek began working the source, contacted the FBI and ATF. The FBI opened a domestic terrorism investigation. Jeffrey knew the authorities were closing in. Jeffrey decided on a new plan. He told his followers the second coming wouldn't happen unless a sacrifice was made, a blood sacrifice. A family had to die to cleanse the group, to fulfill prophecy, to reach Zion. Jeffrey knew exactly which family he wanted dead, the Averys. Jeffrey hated Dennis Avery, saw him as weak, disloyal, a problem. The Averys were the only cult members who didn't live in the farmhouse. Jeffrey considered that a sin. Dennis had set aside a small amount of money in a bank account for his family, instead of giving every cent to Jeffrey, another sin. Jeffrey began calling the murders pruning the vineyard, a reference to scripture. Prosecutors would later say the real reason Jeffrey targeted the Averys was simple. He didn't like them, and he wanted to use their deaths to solidify the group's commitment to him. April 10, 1989. Jeffrey ordered several male followers to dig a pit in the barn, 6 feet by 7 feet, 4 feet deep. When they asked why, Jeffrey told them it was for storage. It wasn't for storage. It was a grave. Over the next week, Jeffrey prepared his followers, told them they were going on a wilderness trip to see God. He instructed Cheryl Avery to write a letter to her family in Missouri. The letter said the Averys got a job in Wyoming. They were moving there, would provide contact information once settled. The letter was designed to stop anyone from looking for them after they disappeared. April 17, 1989. Jeffrey moved all the Avery belongings from their residence into his farmhouse. Rented a motel room for the family. Told them they'd stay there before the wilderness trip. That evening, Jeffrey hosted a farewell dinner at the farmhouse. All his followers attended, including the Avery family. The Averys had no idea it would be their last meal. If this story is hitting you harder than you expected, you're not alone. Thousands of people watch these cases trying to understand how someone they trusted could destroy everything. I cover stories like this because they matter, because the warning signs matter. If that resonates with you, subscribe. You'll see every case I cover. After dinner, Jeffrey called all the men, except Dennis Avery, into his bedroom. He pulled a gun from his holster, held it up. "Are you with me?" Every man pledged support. The participants? Jeffrey Lundgren, his 19-year-old son Damon, Ronald Luff, Daniel Kraft, Richard Brand, Greg Winship. Jeffrey told them the plan. Lure each Avery family member into the barn, one by one. Bind them with duct tape, shoot them, bury them in the pit. A chainsaw had already been set up in the barn, left running to mask the sound of gunshots. The murder weapon was a .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun. Ronald Luff was sent to bring Dennis Avery to the barn. Luff approached Dennis, told them they needed help moving camping equipment. Dennis followed him outside, trusting, oblivious. When they reached the barn, the men were waiting. Luff tried to use a stun gun on Dennis. It malfunctioned. The men tackled Dennis to the ground, bound his hands, feet, mouth with duct tape. Dennis struggled, fought, tried to break free. Too many of them. They carried him to the pit, forced him in. Dennis got to his knees in the dirt, looked up at Jeffrey Lundgren, screamed through the tape. "No, no, this isn't necessary. Please, this isn't necessary. God damn it, God damn it, God damn it." Jeffrey Lundgren raised the .45 caliber handgun, shot Dennis Avery twice in the back. Dennis's body slumped forward into the dirt. Blood pooled around him. Jeffrey made each man look at the body, forcing them to witness what they'd done, binding them to the crime. Damon Lundgren, Jeffrey's son, saw his father shoot Dennis and broke down, cried hysterically, refused to participate further. Jeffrey allowed him to act as a lookout. Then they went back inside to get Cheryl. Ronald Luff returned to the farmhouse, told Cheryl Avery her husband needed help in the barn. Cheryl followed him outside, unsuspecting, trusting. When she reached the barn, the men grabbed her, gagged her, put duct tape over her eyes. Cheryl never saw the pit, never saw her husband's body, never knew what was coming. Jeffrey Lundgren shot her 3 times, twice in the chest, once in the abdomen. Cheryl Avery's body was placed next to her husband in the pit. Then they went back for the daughters. Trina Avery was brought to the barn next, bound with duct tape, shot twice in the head. The first shot ricocheted off her skull, missed her brain. The second shot killed her instantly.
Her body was thrown into the pit with her parents. Rebecca Avery was shot twice, once in the thigh, once in the back. She was left to die in the pit, bleeding out, surrounded by her family. The last to die was the youngest daughter, Karen. Karen was told she was going to see horses. Ronald Luff gave her a piggyback ride to the barn. She was placed in the pit, sitting in the mud, noticeably frightened when the duct tape was wrapped around her mouth and eyes. Jeffrey Lundgren stood over her, pointed the gun at her head, pulled the trigger, shot her twice, once in the head, once in the chest. 5 members of the Avery family were dead. The bodies were covered with lime, soil, rocks, garbage. The pit was sealed. And the entire time while the Avery family was being executed one by one in the barn, the remaining cult members were inside the farmhouse cleaning up after dinner. They had no idea 5 people had just been murdered a few yards away. The next morning, April 18, 1989, Kirtland police and FBI agents arrived at the farmhouse. They were investigating complaints about cult activities and improper firearm use. They searched the barn, walked directly over the graves of the Avery family, but they had no knowledge of the murders. They asked the followers if they were being held against their will. Everyone said no. The authorities left. Jeffrey panicked, feared the police would return with search warrants. Immediately after the authorities left, Jeffrey ordered everyone to pack up.
The entire cult fled to a remote campsite in West Virginia. For the next 8 months, Jeffrey Lundgren and his followers lived off the grid, moving from place to place, avoiding detection. The bodies of the Avery family remained buried in the barn, decomposing, forgotten. No one came looking for them. Cheryl's letter to her family in Missouri had worked. Everyone thought the Averys had moved to Wyoming. By the end of 1989, cracks were forming in Jeffrey's cult. Larry Keith Johnson was a cult member who had become disillusioned with Jeffrey. Johnson was angry because his wife Catherine had been selected by Jeffrey to become his second wife as part of a polygamous arrangement. December 31, 1989, Johnson contacted ATF agents in Kansas City, Missouri, told them everything. Drew a map showing exactly where the bodies were buried in the barn at the Chardon Road farmhouse. January 3, 1990, Kirtland Police Chief Dennis Yarborough obtained a search warrant. Investigators descended on the farmhouse. Kirtland Police, Lake County Sheriff's Office, FBI, ATF. They began excavating the barn. Assistant Prosecutor Karen Caldwell would later say, "We waited hours and we dug in that barn and we hoped he was wrong and we prayed he was wrong and he wasn't wrong." January 4, 1990, all 5 bodies were discovered, each bound with duct tape, each shot with a .45 caliber handgun. January 10th, the coroner confirmed the identities. Dennis Avery, 49, Cheryl Avery, 46, Trina Avery, 15, Rebecca Avery, 13.
Karen Avery, 7. An entire family wiped out by a self-proclaimed prophet in the name of God. I know these cases stay with you. They're supposed to. If you want to see how every one of these stories ends, hit subscribe. You'll get every investigation, every trial, every outcome. Jeffrey Lundgren, his wife Alice, and their son Damon were arrested January 7, 1990, at a motel between San Diego and the Mexican border. They'd been arranging for Alice's parents to pick up their 3 youngest children. Jeffrey had planned to flee to Mexico with Damon, Catherine Johnson, and Daniel Kraft. The arrests came too soon. Daniel Kraft and Catherine Johnson were also arrested near San Diego.
Eventually, 13 cult members were charged in connection with the murders. Jeffrey's trial began August 13, 1990 in Lake County Common Pleas Court. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Witness testimony from cult members who participated in the murders. Forensic evidence linking Jeffrey to the crime scene. Testimony about his control over the group. His claims of divine authority. His plan to sacrifice the Avery family. The defense tried to argue that Jeffrey suffered from a mixed personality disorder with narcissistic, paranoid, and antisocial traits. They claimed he genuinely believed he was following a divine decree, a command from God. The prosecution painted a different picture. They described Jeffrey as a vulgar, debauched criminal who killed for control, not religion. August 29, 1990. The jury found Jeffrey Lundgren guilty of 5 counts of aggravated murder and 5 counts of kidnapping.
September 20th, 1990. After deliberating for just 2 hours, the jury recommended the death penalty. Jeffrey Lundgren was sentenced to death by electric chair. The method would later be changed to lethal injection. Alice Lundgren wasn't present during the murders. She remained in the house while her husband executed the Avery family in the barn. Prosecutors initially wanted to offer Alice a plea deal, 15 to 50 years with possibility of parole after 5. The judge refused. August 1st, 1990, Alice was convicted of 5 counts of conspiracy, complicity, and kidnapping. August 29th, 1990, she was sentenced to 150 years to life. She'll be eligible for parole in October 2092, long after she's dead. Damon Lundgren, Jeffrey's son, who had been 19 years old at the time of the murders, was convicted September 18, 1990, of 4 counts of aggravated murder and 4 counts of kidnapping. The jury acquitted him of Cheryl Avery's murder because they believed he'd been too hysterical after witnessing his father kill Dennis to have participated further. Damon was sentenced to 120 years to life. Ronald Luff, who had been instrumental in planning and executing the murders, received 170 years to life. Daniel Kraft received 50 years to life. Richard Brand and Greg Winship, who participated but to a lesser extent, both pleaded guilty and received 15 years to life. Richard Brand was paroled March 29, 2010, after serving 21 years. Greg Winship was paroled December 28, 2010. Several other cult members who had lesser roles received sentences ranging from 7 to 25 years.
Susan Luff, Sharon Blunchley, and Deborah Olivares were all paroled December 28, 2010. Katherine Johnson, who had been selected to be Jeffrey's second wife and had not participated in the murders, received 1 year for obstruction of justice, released in 1991 after serving 7 months. Jeffrey Lundgren spent the next 17 years on death row at the Ohio State Penitentiary in Youngstown. He filed multiple appeals, all rejected. He claimed the murders had been a misinterpretation of Scripture, that he genuinely believed God commanded him to kill the Avery family. His attorney, Henry Helo, claimed Jeffrey had changed, that he showed remorse. Prosecutors disagreed. They said Jeffrey Lundgren had no remorse, that even after 17 years, he still believed he'd done the right thing. September 2006. Jeffrey appeared before the Ohio Parole Board for a clemency hearing. Board member Kathleen Korbeck interviewed him for 1 hour and 40 minutes. Jeffrey shared details about his strict religious upbringing, about how he'd been taught that love equals judgment. The parole board unanimously denied clemency. October 2006. Jeffrey's attorneys made a final attempt to delay his execution. Filed a lawsuit arguing that Ohio's use of lethal injection constituted cruel and unusual punishment. They pointed to Jeffrey's obesity, 275 pounds, his diabetes, claimed these conditions made him more likely to experience pain during the execution. October 17, 2006. Judge Gregory Frost temporarily delayed the execution.
But late Monday, October 23rd, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals issued an order allowing the execution to proceed. The United States Supreme Court refused a last-minute request to stop the execution. Governor Bob Taft denied clemency. Jeffrey Lundgren would die October 24, 2006. These stories don't have easy answers. They never do. But if you're here trying to understand what happened and why it matters, you're in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. October 24, 2006. Jeffrey Lundgren's final day on Earth. The night before, October 23rd at 10:49 p.m., Jeffrey appeared to be sleeping when he got a call from the warden informing him the stay of execution had been lifted. 10:50 p.m., he called his wife, Alice. No answer. He tried her cell phone 2 minutes later. Got through. They spoke for several minutes. 11:04 p.m. His attorney called. They spoke briefly. 11:05 p.m. Jeffrey called Alice again. The morning of October 24th. 8:13 a.m. Medical staff gave Jeffrey medications for his high blood pressure and blood sugar. Treatments for the obesity and diabetes he'd hoped would save his life. 8:23 a.m. While on the phone with Alice, Jeffrey began to cry. The official time log noted that with 2 hours and 28 minutes left in his life, the 6'1", 275-pound man who had spent 17 years on death row for murdering a family of 5 broke down and cried. His last conversation with Alice ended 1 hour and 11 minutes before he would be pronounced dead. For his last meal, Jeffrey Lundgren requested turkey, potatoes and gravy, a salad, and pumpkin pie. Since he was being executed in the morning, he was also offered a cup of coffee, 2 cups of juice, 2 cups of milk, Rice Krispies, 3 pancakes, and 3 servings of syrup. Jeffrey declined the coffee and the syrup. He ate his final meal, knowing that in just a few hours he would be dead. 10 a.m. Jeffrey was escorted from his holding cell to the execution chamber at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville. 17 steps from the holding cell to the chamber. He walked slowly, his massive frame moving deliberately. Witnesses began gathering. Among them were Cheryl Avery's brothers, Donald Bailey and Kent Kilby. They'd waited 17 years for this moment. Donald Bailey stood up and approached the window in the death chamber as Jeffrey was brought in. "I wanted him to know I was there," he said later. Also among the witnesses was Stephen Latourette, the prosecutor who had secured Jeffrey's conviction and death sentence. Latourette had witnessed the excavation of the bodies in 1990. He'd seen the Avery family pulled from that pit in the barn. He'd spent years prosecuting this case, and now he was here to watch Jeffrey Lundgren die. No one witnessed the execution on Jeffrey's behalf. He did not acknowledge the presence of any of the witnesses. Jeffrey was strapped to a gurney, arms extended, IV lines inserted into his veins. Shunts for the injections had been placed in Jeffrey's arms before he was brought into the execution chamber. Prison staff had trouble inserting shunts in a previous execution and did not want to repeat that mistake.
10:17 a.m. The warden asked Jeffrey if he had any final words. Jeffrey turned his head slightly and spoke. "For my last words, I'd like to profess my love for God, my family, my children, and my beloved wife. I am because you are." Those were the last words Jeffrey Lundgren would ever speak. 10:17 a.m. The warden gave a secret signal. The execution process began. 2 syringes of thiopentyl sodium, a sedative designed to render Jeffrey unconscious, were injected at 10:17 a.m. and 10:18 a.m. 10:19 a.m. A full flush was administered to clear the IV lines. 10:20 a.m. and 10:21 a.m. Pancuronium bromide, a paralytic that stops breathing, was injected. 10:22 a.m. Another full flush. 10:23 a.m. The final syringe containing potassium chloride, the drug that stops the heart, was injected. Jeffrey did not move as the drugs were administered. His massive body lay still on the gurney. His breathing slowed, then stopped. His heart ceased beating. 10:25 a.m. The injection process was concluded. 10:26 a.m. Jeffrey Don Lundgren was pronounced dead. The warden announced the time of death at 10:27 a.m. The witness curtain was closed at 10:27 a.m. Jeffrey Lundgren, the self-proclaimed prophet who had murdered an entire family in the name of God, was dead at the age of 56. After the execution, Stephen Latourette spoke to reporters. He said he didn't take any pleasure in seeing Jeffrey die. "I can't get the scene of the murder out of my mind," he said. "I had hoped there would be no children as the bodies were being unburied."
Those of us who were in the barn remembered it was the parents first, then the children. For the community of Kirtland, Ohio, Jeffrey's execution brought a sense of closure. Kirtland was a small town known for the historic Mormon temple, but the Lundgren cult murders had overshadowed that history for 17 years. Fire Chief Rick Martindale said, "I think with him getting executed, it's going to help the whole community. This will help put an end to it." The farmhouse at 8671 Chardon Road, where Jeffrey had lived with his followers, where the Avery family had eaten their last meal, where 5 people had been executed in a barn, became infamous. A man named Jeff Howell moved into the farmhouse 6 years before Jeffrey's execution. He told reporters, "I went down and laid in that grave to tell them I'm not afraid of them." November 13th, 2007. Just over a year after Jeffrey's execution, the barn was demolished. A new church, New Promise Church, now stands on the property.
The church purchased the land for $350,000, hoping to bring something positive to a place marked by horror. Police Sergeant Ron Andelsek, who had led the investigation into the cult killings, compared Jeffrey Lundgren to other infamous cult leaders. David Koresh, who led the Branch Davidians and died in the Waco siege in 1993. Jim Jones, who orchestrated the Jonestown Massacre in 1978, where over 900 people died. Charles Manson, who orchestrated the Tate LaBianca murders in 1969. They used the same methods on their followers, Andelsek said.
Jeff wasn't the first. Jeffrey Lundgren was one of Ohio's most notorious criminals. At the time of his execution, 3 other Ohio death row inmates had killed 5 people each. Jeffrey's execution was the 5th in Ohio in 2006, and the 24th since the state reinstated the death penalty in 1976. It was the 46th execution in the United States in 2006, and the 1050th since the death penalty was reinstated nationwide in 1976. The Avery family should still be alive. Dennis Avery, a devoted husband and father, should have watched his daughters grow up, get married, have children of their own. Cheryl Avery, a loving mother, should have been there for every milestone, every holiday, every moment. Trina, Rebecca, and Karen should have had the chance to live full lives, to experience love, joy, success, and all the things that were stolen from them. Instead, they were executed in a barn by a man who claimed to speak for God. Their bodies were thrown into a pit and covered with dirt. They were left there for 8 months while their killer fled to the wilderness. And when they were finally found, they'd been dead for so long that identification required forensic analysis. The Avery family was betrayed by someone they trusted completely, someone they had moved their entire lives to follow, someone they believed was a prophet. On October 24, 2006, justice was served. The case of Jeffrey Don Lundgren is now closed.